today we have gone so far away from the templates and the patterns that nature has used that I think it's hard for us to appreciate what could collapse now. The average farmer is now 60 years old, and so it's going to change hands. Now, obviously, most of it is going to be inherited by children, but very few of those children want to stay in farming. So then the question is, all right, so the children inherit the farm. They don't want to farm, so what happens to the land? The point is that there is definitely a centralization of power, production, practice, management, in the ag sector. The industrial food complex, which is, of course, the USDA, the FDA, and all the corporate structure around food, that fraternity has, I don't want to say conspired because then you're a nutcase, but they all went to the same school, they drank the same Kool-Aid, and they've all agreed on language and protocols that make labels meaningless. For example, irradiation. The label term for irradiation is cold pasteurization. And, of course, we have the same things happening in the organic movement. I mean, now that the government owns the term organic, we're the only country in the world that certifies organic hydroponics. No other country in the rest of the world recognizes hydroponics. We can't trust labels, we can't trust the government, and we can't trust the big outfits.
Welcome back to Finance and Liberty and Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest. Joel Salatin is the co-founder of Polyface Farms, a teaching farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. We're here with Joel on the 21st of November, 2019. Joel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Donegan. It's great to be with you again. Always a pleasure.
Our audience loves the wit and wisdom that you bring to many different topics, but opening our eyes to things that we aren't questioning and should be about where our food comes from and how we can participate more directly in that, specifically if people want to make sure that they're lowering their risk of making sure that we have clean, healthy, high-integrity food and that we're contributing to a culture that supports an ecosystem that allows that to thrive and flourish. There's a couple of topics we wanted to make sure and check in with you. One thing that's rather new that people are bringing out more and more in various news stories, articles, and commentary that I had not heard prior to this year, and it seems to be a drumbeat increasing, is concern about the availability and price of food going forward. We're being warned that for various factors, we should be concerned about threats to the availability of food and to prices of food increasing perhaps in the year ahead. Can you talk to us about what you're aware of are the major factors that do affect pricing and availability of food, and why this might be a time when those factors are conspiring to shift valid concerns in those directions, or if you think those concerns are unfounded?
Yeah, I'm not ready to question those concerns. I do know that there's a lot of money to be made in fear, and if you can whip people into a frenzy of fear, they will accept many things that they would never accept otherwise. And so, for example, we have a huge push for kind of sci-fi food, from hydroponics to LED lighted farms to veggie burgers. I mean, there are numerous efforts here by the food industry to push people into GMOs, into eating things that they've been a little bit dubious about eating before. Is this real food? Is it authentic food? Is it nutritious food? And so when you when you scare people into thinking traditional food can't keep up, you take a lot of the edge off of their reluctance to try some of this new pseudo food or Star Trek food or Franken food or whatever you want to call it. So I think there is a definite theme here and an agenda, if you will, to get people fearful, because people who are scared will accept things that they wouldn't accept any other way. That being said, there are definitely some changes occurring. One is that it seems like we have basically extracted the huge increases that we saw in food production per acre over the last 80 years is waning. That's the thing, and water desertification is increasing as well. The arid lands are jumping across the Mediterranean into southern Spain. They're moving up in the southwestern U.S. Aquifers are lower. India is desperate for potable water. Most of it's polluted. By this time, everybody was hoping that desalinization would become extremely cheap, and it is definitely becoming cheaper, but it's not. And finally, just epizootics. I mean, the African swine fever in China has dropped their domestic pork production by 50% in the last 18 months. China eats half of the world's pork. So when you decimate China's pork population by half, it affects prices dramatically. And so we're seeing, for example, the demand on U.S. exports rising substantially. The Netherlands, I've been there half a dozen times, and goodness, in the last 10 years, they've gone from, strutting around as the world's, second largest food producer behind the U.S. to now putting all sorts of moratoriums on production because they have so much manure in their waterways, and they have subsidence. The last time I was there, I had a room full of farmers talking about their land because they've dried out this land. The peat, the peat underneath it, when it gets dry, it decomposes, and as it decomposes, the actual it's called subsidence, where the actual volume of the underlying stuff starts to deteriorate, and the land actually sinks. And in the Netherlands, 2 feet of sinking is the difference between covered up with ocean or not. So anyway, I could go on and on, but you get the idea that there's a tremendous amount of concern about the volume of production, amount of water, aquifers holding up, and just sickness, disease, epizootic and stuff in animals and plants. And so when you combine those together, it does seem like, when you get too close to a beehive and all the bees kind of go from their sitting on the hive to active alert.
Swarming, you can hear it. Yeah. You can hear that all around you.
Yeah. I think there's as I say, there's some unrest among the peasants. The villagers are restless. And I definitely think that we see that in our culture right now, and there are many factors for it, not the least of which is the whole, economic picture, the political picture, all that stuff as well.
Sure, but we're looking specifically, in addition to all those factors that we talk about all the time on our channels, we are concerned that we haven't been talking about and focusing on this that's so vital, to everyone's well-being. It's funny because you just mentioned about drought, and you mentioned some hot spots around the world. We just returned last month from a trip to California, and as we were driving through Bakersfield area between Carmel, Monterey area, and Los Angeles, you pass hour after hour after hour of these enormous monoculture fields of different types and big billboards that are proudly trying to convince you that it's okay to use water for irrigation in the way that they are to support this kind of agriculture in a very dry, otherwise region. But we've been told that there's concerns, for example, that the Colorado River, from which California, among others, draw their water, is rapidly dropping. Somebody else said that wells that are currently down 200 feet are projected to need to get down to 1,200 feet to reach water within a few years. So it sounds like it's not just other places in the world, but even right here in the U.S. that drought is a...
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Australia, I've been there numerous times, and the Murray-Darling River is one of their, is their equivalent of our Mississippi. And, you go into any eatery and it's got pictures of steamboats going up and down the Murray-Darling River, and today it doesn't even go to the ocean. It's dry. You can't even, it just quits. And same thing with the aquifers. I was on a farm there, and the guy had the original deed from 1820, when that land was settled and it was sold. The closer the water was to the surface, when these were hand-dug wells in 1820, so it made a big difference if water was 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, or 15 feet down. And on his place, the water was down about 10 feet, and so it was pretty valuable. And they started farming there, and within 30 years they depleted that aquifer, and then the next 30 they depleted the next one. Anyway, to make a long story short, today they're down about 600 feet, and they're about to pump that aquifer dry. And where do you go? I mean, how far? Where does this work? So so these are structural issues that, if you're paying attention, they're a little bit discomfiting. And may I say that is one of the reasons why we have I think just a complete resurgence. It's one of the, you don't see it much in the media, but I can tell you, living in the tribe that I live in, there is an absolute, resurgence of back to the land, farmette. I want an acre. I want 5 acres. I want a bunker. I mean, people are using that kind of language. I need a retreat so that when everything collapses, we'll be able to feed ourselves and survive. So there is a definite strategic, I think, weighing of the alternatives that's driving a renewed interest in self-reliance and even rural folk skills, blacksmithing, construction, rudimentary construction, this sort of thing.
Right, for self-reliance and less dependence on complex knowledge and technology that we don't have direct influence or control over, but things that we can do with our own hands, in our own families, in our own communities.
Yeah, and the number of online courses, for everything from constructing rustic shelter to food canning, food growing, all this is just amazing. The homesteaders.
We've even seen some of that stuff offered through local extension, like even through local community colleges and things like beekeeping and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. All these traditional rural skills, which we've lost in the last 50, 60 years, they're definitely making a resurgence, and I think that's a direct result of the villagers becoming restless.
Well, you started out by telling us that sometimes inordinate fear can be used as a marketing tool to try to get people to not object to directions that they might otherwise object to. And you mentioned some rather unconventional, whether it's GMOs or frankenfoods or whatever things that are affecting our food supply. But it sounds like the more we've talked about this, it sounds like there are some significant reasons for legitimate concern about what the next, I guess the next few decades or the next century is going to hold as far as our ability to produce food via any method. As far as some of these, if we need to have access to good water is one that we've been focusing on. Are there other concerns other than access to good water that we should be aware of as well, that people should plan around?
Just soil loss. I mean, if just plain old soil loss, and I think just as a general thing, just disease, whether it's plant disease, whether it's animal disease or whatever, like affecting China right now. But we've certainly seen this kind of thing. It seems like there's always some new a new bug, a new insect, a new rust, a new fungus, something developing. And for example, in our area right here, down on the Atlantic seaboard, we lost the American chestnut in early 1900, and now we're losing the white ash, which is a wonderful, wonderful tree. But we've got a invasive the emerald ash borer, and I've told my grandchildren, I've said, you watch these ash trees because they won't be here. When you're my age, there won't be an ash tree in the whole eastern U.S. And so these are indicative of changes. I don't want to get into climate change or global warming or whatever, but the truth is, things do. You can take soil core samples and look at pollen counts, and my goodness, landscapes have changed dramatically over time, over history, from the little ice age of the Middle Ages to that affects what things grow and what happens. And today we have gone so far away from the templates and the patterns that nature has used that I think it's hard for us to appreciate what could collapse now that our crops are very narrow genetically. Black Angus beef, it's a pretty narrow genetic base. Chicken, it's a pretty narrow genetic base, and so I think that for example, right now the industry is having this woody breast syndrome. It's affecting millions and millions of chickens, and it occurs because they grow too fast in the industry. They're growing them so fast that their breast muscle can't keep up, and it just kind of turns to a spaghetti string in there. And of course, the industry says, "Well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. They'll keep selecting and culling and selecting and culling." But we've pushed stuff. No engine runs most efficiently when the gas pedal is pushed to the floor, and definitely neither does biology. And so as we push things to the floor harder and harder, we start stressing those biological constraints that have created boundaries over history, over time. And chances are things will begin to unravel a little more as we start pushing those biological limits.
You mentioned narrow genetic base, and I guess I haven't heard it put exactly that way. I've heard monoculture, and what it impresses me is when people talk about the lack of diversity is kind of like placing all your bets on one particular outcome, and that's never a very good plan in almost any endeavor. Is to place all your bets on one thing rather than having kind of your bases covered and having a diversity of options that can weather different storms, because nobody knows what kind of pressures nature or mankind or whatever are going to array against us, and And any, if we all use, like you say, one species of chicken or one species of whatever, it's likely to get things might be going to look like they're going fine until it doesn't, and then all of a sudden, one thing just lights out. We had the great joy of seeing a movie recently, The Biggest Little Farm. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yes.
And one of the things that they kept bringing out through in there was that principle of diversify, and just using many, many different approaches. And also the natural checks and balances, as you said, rather than, like the ash borer beetle is just running unchecked because it has no natural predator or whatever.
Right. Well, I mean, the classic example of this historically was the Irish potato famine. I mean, that's what happened there. They picked one or two cultivars from Peru. I mean, Peru, where potatoes were developed. Goodness, they've got 100 different varieties of potatoes, but Ireland only grew one or two, and boom, wiped it all out. And so that diversity gives you a tremendous amount of protection. Yes.
And the modern food industry, in the name of efficiency and driving down low costs and driving up profits, as you said, has pushed and pushed. But one of the mechanisms they've used to push that is economies of scale. And so there are these mega farms and mega feedlots and everything, and all being done in the same species, the same way or whatever. So the modern system, in a sense, tells us, like you said, they might want to scare us about, you shouldn't depend on old traditional methods because that's never going to your planet will starve if you use traditional methods. So we even had a produce manager at a local grocery store tell us that. We said, "Where's your organic food?" He said, "Well, it's over there, but you know what? If the whole world went organic, we'd all starve to death."
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the party line is you need this new modern agriculture to feed a growing world or whatever. And it's like, but they're actually the ones that are putting us in greater danger.
Yeah.
Those new.
That's right. It's like it looks real good for a while, but then the fragility of it. I had a wonderful Chinese guy come and visit. He's a Chinese farmer in China, and he has pigs. I asked him, "Are you concerned about the swine fever there?" He said, "Oh no." I said, "No, my pigs. I rotate them around, keep them on clean ground. They get green material." He said, "It doesn't affect those. The ones it affects are the ones that are either in confinement houses or they're in filthy conditions." He said, "Those are the ones that are getting the sickness. The rest of us," he said, we don't have any problem with it." And that's just a perfect example of how an immunological habitat, a habitat conducive to immunological function, is built through hygiene, rotations, diversity. Those kinds of things, and it's then as a result, it's way more robust, and as far as feeding the world, not only can our system feed the world, it can do it with a lot less risk than the fragile, industrial system right now.
Yeah, clarifying, you said our system, and people might misinterpret that to mean the modern American industrial farm, but you mean the Polyface Farm and the people farm, who are like-minded.
A non-chemical nature template approach. I think people don't realize that 500 years ago, North America grew more food than it does today. Now, it didn't get all eaten by people, but, we had somewhere between 100 and 200 million bison. We had 2 million wolves, each of whom needed 20 pounds of meat a day. We had 200 million beavers. They ate more green, vegetable material than all the people in North America today. The abundance that was here, that was, by the way, very carefully maintained by indigenous peoples. The abundance that was here actually outstrips the abundance of today, and we didn't have tractors, hybrid seeds, or any chemical fertilizers, pesticides, any of those things, and yet it was an incredibly abundant place. Why? Because it was because there was no waste, and everything was was relationally symbiotic to create the complexity and synergy that nature enjoys in its, the way it runs. And of course, the Native Americans were extremely instrumental in lighting fires, moving animals, creating abundance as well.
Can we turn our attention to the land itself? You've talked to us not that long ago about a generational turnover of ownership of the land, the productive farmland in the United States in particular. Maybe it's a worldwide phenomenon, but you can let us know. Because there is some concern that's been raised by others, just as it seems that over the past century, aspect after aspect of people's lives and their vital interests were taken over by for-profit corporations, whether it was childbirth that went from at home to now it's hospital, now it's scheduled cesareans, to educating your children, which used to happen at home and naturally by the parents, and then it became apprenticeships or whatever, and and then it became only institutionalized, and now it's all student debt, student loans that are all government subsidized and everything, and it's just thing after thing after thing in our lives being taken over by big corporate for-profit medicine, everything. Can you talk to us about what we're seeing about the land itself and productive farmland? Is there a concern about the next generation and what's going to become of the ownership of the direction and shepherding of our soils, of our land?
Yes, what a great question. Yeah, the actuarials right now show that in the next 15 15 years, 50%, half of all U.S. agricultural equity, that's land, buildings, and equipment, will change hands because the average farmer is now 60 years old, and so it's going to change hands. Now, obviously, most of it is going to be inherited by children, but very few of those children want to stay in farming. So then the question is, all right, so the children inherit the farm. They don't want to farm, so what happens to the land? And, of course, sometimes it's idled, but most of the time it's rented out or leased out to somebody else. Well, who's going to lease it? Generally, it's going to be a farmer who's wanting to expand, and so much of this land is being now managed. There are fewer and fewer managers. In other words, there's a concentration of management within the agriculture sector, and that concentration, of course, means fewer managers, fewer markets, fewer options. When there are fewer people involved, it just means there's fewer options.
Sure.
And so that's what's happening on the one hand. The other hand is that much of this land is being purchased by non-farmers. So if the kids want to sell it, kids, often they're in their 50s, right? So they decide to sell. Then who buys it? And depending on who you talk to, it's being bought by numerous different kinds of entities. In the Midwest, in the middle of, in the grain belt, much of it is being bought by multinational corporations. In our area, it's probably because we're, closer to D.C. and more urbanized. It's primarily being bought by non-farmers, people from the city who have made money in something else and want to graduate to a farm. I mean, that's like the American ultimate. I now have a farm. I mean, there's this whole mystique around having a farm in America. So, owning property, and so we have a lot of that going on. But those folks typically are leasing it out as well, and so because they're not real farmers, they just want to have pretty place to show their friends and go on the weekends and enjoy the birds and the wildlife and all the things involved with a farm. And the point is that there is definitely a centralization of power, production, practice, management, in the ag sector. There's a slow consolidation. Now, on the other end of that is a continued, whatever I'll say, an accelerating desire for little farmettes, for for 10, 15, 20 acre bunkers, rural living situations. Goodness, 5 to 10 acre places are hot commodities, and there's a steady flow of people coming into those. So while we have consolidation on the one side, we have the opposite, the division, splintering, and returning of many families on the other. So it's kind of the way things work. You have yin yang, and both of them happen at the same time.
How about the nationality of ownership of these big corporate-owned tracts of land? Is it mostly domestic corporations and cooperatives and whatever that are buying those up, and investment groups, or are there also foreign owners buying up American farmland?
In the U.S., I think most of it is domestic, but we are unusual that way. I can tell you that in the areas, especially Australia and New Zealand, and of course Tasmania is part of Australia, but in that rim there, south of China, south of Southeast Asia, it is a major issue. In fact, Tasmania put a moratorium on foreign ownership of land a couple of years ago, and so there is certainly foreign ownership in the U.S., but it's not as pronounced as it is in other areas, I think.
Just wondering about that as a strategic asset for any country.
Yeah, well, the U.S. has some pretty big outfits. In the agriculture space, the U.S.'s agriculture outfits are as big as any in the world.
Some of them are as big as some of the economies of some of the countries in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Could we turn our attention now to the food integrity itself? You mentioned earlier when we were talking with you a while back about the buyout of Whole Foods Market by Amazon, and at first that was just a real head scratcher for some folks. They thought, wait a minute, Whole Foods came out as trying to basically popularize and expand the availability of organic and all natural and free range and all this stuff, and bring it to many towns that didn't have anything like that, or didn't have it as at the price that they could bring it or whatever. But now that it's part of Amazon, it really makes you go, whoa, wait a minute. And we've heard people raise significant concerns about what does the integrity of some of this labeling, such as we had a guy on not that long ago, Evgeny Trufkin, talking about the meaning of so that we don't overinterpret and misinterpret what's labeled when you say all natural or when they say free range on chicken packages, that sort of thing, or vegetarian fed on chicken, for example. So in the arena of food integrity, can we start with sort of, again, this corporate buyout phenomenon, and what do you think that's doing to the ability of ordinary people to make sure that they know what they're getting? And then we can talk about some of the labeling and other stuff after that.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and in fact, I am co-writing a book right now as we speak with Dr. Sina McCullough, who wrote a book a couple of years ago. The title is "Hands Off My Food." And it's essentially an expose of the assumptions that people have about FDA oversight and the reality of the lack of oversight, and even the conspicuous adulteration of words and meanings and accepted assumptions. And so she and I are co-writing a book. Interestingly, the title is Beyond Labels, because what's happened is in this space, the fraternity, I call it the industrial food complex, which is, of course, the U.S. duh, the F duh, and all the corporate structure around food. That fraternity has, I don't want to say conspired because then you're a nutcase, but they all went to the same school, they drank the same Kool-Aid, and they've all agreed on language and protocols that make labels meaningless. For example, irradiation. Irradiation, the label term for irradiation is cold pasteurization. Now, most people don't view pasteurization as necessarily terrible. Some of us think it's negative, but it doesn't have the negative connotation of irradiation. And of course, we have the same things happening in the organic movement. I mean, now that the government owns the term organic, we're the only country in the world that certifies organic hydroponics. No other country in the rest of the world recognizes hydroponics. In other words, soilless systems. This is where you just intravenously tube feed plants with no soil. No country in the world recognizes that as an organic approach except the U.S. We have requirements, for example, in organic standards for access to pasture. Well, the pasture is a little 3-foot grass apron around a confinement house that the chickens have access to, 4 days a year. I mean, these kinds of things. And most organic chickens, they don't even attempt to adhere to the rules. There's no outdoor access. There's no nothing. And they don't even attempt, and the USDA doesn't enforce any of it either. So there is and a lot of people don't realize that 50% of the organic feedstuffs used in the U.S. Come from foreign countries, most of it through Istanbul. And there have been numerous exposés about how, the stuff comes out of Kazakhstan and all the stand countries over there through Istanbul. Regular stuff, it gets stamped organic and gets imported to the U.S. as organic. So there's once things go to that point, there's a tremendous amount of scofflaws in the system that are ready to ape the system. In fact, the guy I think he's in Ohio, he was responsible for brokering 5%, which is huge for one person, to broker 5% of the organic grain in the U.S., and he was found to be completely fraudulent. And before he went to court on the fraud of falsifying paperwork for organics, he locked himself in his garage with his car and committed suicide with carbon monoxide. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on out there, and the labels are simply part and parcel of a kind of an obfuscating fraternity to try to make things sound better than they are, and that's why C and I are writing this book, Beyond Labels. We're trying to take people on a continuum from where they are to a place where they can truly trust food, and that is now taking a little bit of effort, but it certainly can be done. I mean, you can jump on a website of, for example, Shenandoah Organics does chickens in the Shenandoah Valley here. You can jump on their website, and they have a tab, meet our farmers, and you can go meet their farmers, and all the farmers are standing outside their confinement chicken house. There's no grass, there's no chickens out. You don't have to be real skilled to be able to see some of this stuff, but you do have to, get up from watching the TV and put People magazine down. Don't worry, the Kardashians will still be on the cover tomorrow. And put some effort in sleuthing, vetting your own food, because we can't trust labels, we can't trust the government, and we can't trust the big outfits. Eventually, you have to sleuth for your food, just like you would sleuth for a better wellness practitioner, a better teacher for your kids, a better engine mechanic for your car, all those kinds of things.
So that's where we want to leave off on some practical guidance for people. If people really are concerned about the access going forward to healthy food for their family, and they just woke up enough to start even bothering to look at the labels and reading the labels, and sometimes gulping and paying the twice as much as it costs to buy something that says organic as the conventional stuff, not conventional, the experimental stuff that's called conventional. Okay, so if just looking at the labels isn't going to do it, what are some general principles? You mentioned do some basic research, but what are maybe 2 or 3 things that people can do right where they live, right where they get the access to their food in their local community to find better food for their families?
Right. Well, what you have to do is find the tribe that's doing this, and that tribe, you might find them down at the farmers market. You might as you start into this, you will become more and more skilled at doing it. And use websites. My goodness, look at the different websites. Now, at this point, I can be very self-serving and say, well, you can get your meat from us. We now ship nationwide. We started that July 3rd, and part of that was
good for you.
Part of that was because of this changing climate. When Walmart became the world's largest organic purveyor, and Amazon.com changed the interface of retail. The little business book, Who Moved My Cheese? Well, our cheese got moved, and so we have to change to be relevant. We don't mind being nostalgic. We just don't want to be obsolete. And so then what do you do about price? Well, on price, what you do is you buy unprocessed and you buy bulk. Almost everybody gives volume discounts, and so get volume discounts. Get a quarter of beef. Don't get a piece. Get a half a hog. Don't get a piece. And the same thing. Get a bushel of tomatoes and get in your own kitchen and make and juice them for juice or can them or whatever. But get whole foods and bulk volume of foods and put attention on finding the best stuff. Use websites. Talk to friends. Talk to people that are in the movement. Every community has people that are really expert at in this food space. They know where the good stuff is. So make friends with them and talk to them. Ask them where the good stuff is, and you'll gradually suss out where it is. Buy in bulk. Use your kitchen, and you'll be surprised what you can what you can get by on.
You reminded me of a lesson we had learned over some time in the past. As we would travel around the country with our kids, we homeschooled our 5 kids, and one of our most delightful things we would do is we'd have them we knew we were going to go do a travel trip to see some part of the country, whether it was the canyon lands or the mountain states or down south or wherever. And so we would have them do research reports ahead of time, and then we'd get to go travel and see the thing that they had reported on. They just found that was just wonderful to see it in real life after they looked it up in the encyclopedia or wherever. But one of the things that we struggled with was, as we traveled around the country, we were traveling away from our usual sources of good, healthy food. So we thought, this is just a desert. We thought at one point, and I won't blame certain states, but there are certain states we went into where we felt like there's no good food in that state. And then we had a little trick. There's just one little tiny trick. And it's like what you said when you said find the tribe who are already plugged in, is we learned a little trick, and that was find a town that had a natural foods co-op, go in the natural foods co-op, maybe buy a few things, but at least ask them, hey, where can we get is there any all natural restaurants here? Are there any place that a traveler can get some decent food? And it was remarkable how plugging in with people who were already plugged in, they knew the local scene,
right.
and they could help us just that quick
right.
get connected.
Yeah.
And same thing with farmers markets. Yep.
Right. There is a subculture. I mean, this right now in our country, the main culture is McDonald's and Hardee's and Burger King, but there is a subculture, a very healthy, vibrant subculture, and it's growing every day. And so you need to plug into that. So just like the homeschooler isn't going to get a lot of help and encouragement from the established school system, well, you're not going to get a lot of help from the established food system finding the alternative. But if you will research it, sleuth it out, and find a point of contact, then suddenly this whole world opens up. The subculture opens up, and guess what? It's out there. It's very cool.
Even before we started talking, you and I were mentioning that sometimes you can even get like courses. We have catalogs that come in the mail from our local community colleges and that sort of thing, and they're teaching like beekeeping and candle making and soap making and things like that. So I bet you anything that if you attend one of those classes, that the instructor or some of the other attendees are going to know some of the people who are in the know about what's available around in your area as well.
Absolutely, artisanship in whatever handicraft is closely related to artisanship in food craft. I mean, it's all craft, and so when you start heading down the artisan craft path, all sorts of things open up to you. I mean, that's one of the things that we think is driving a lot of this self-reliance is the homeschooling movement. When you opt out of the orthodoxy in one area of life and find the opt-out path exciting and rewarding, you quickly look around and say, well, what else do I need to opt out of? Where else do I need to make a course change here? And that's what happens. So what you have is, a family decides, well, we're going to homeschool. Next thing you know, they've got a garden in the backyard, a beehive on the roof, and a little grain mill, clamped to the kitchen counter. And next thing you know, they've got a goat and a cow in the backyard. I mean, it just kind of progresses.
It's funny because you use the term orthodoxy, and I completely understand what you mean when you say it that way. But people, we need to get our heads screwed on straight, because what we're living in for the last generation to say 2 generations is completely experimental and radical departure from conventional wisdom that's been time tested and proven. So it's actually rediscovering authentic orthodoxy as the ticket out to freedom. Yeah. Well, Joel, if people want to find out more of your amazing work and what you do there on Polyface Farms, what can they do to get plugged in and stay aware of where you lecture all over the place and that kind of stuff? So how can they stay connected with you?
Yeah, I do. So the website is Polyface Farms. That's our website. If you when you start typing in about the time you get to POLY, it'll pop right up, and there's a website there with everything on it. And if I could take 10 seconds to give a shameless plug for, if anybody wants to really to plug into this world, next July 17 and 18, that's July 17 and 18, 2020, we're going to be hosting the first ever on-farm Mother Earth News Fair here at our farm. There will be 300 vendors here with everything from herbs to kitchenware to gardening to livestock, water systems, alternative energy, everything that you can imagine. There'll be probably a guy here with a truck that runs on wood gas. It's just amazing. It's the best gathering of everything that's alternative, cutting edge, innovative in this space, and I hope everybody comes, and we're expecting somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people over the 2 days. But it'll be a great and there will be great speakers here. Elliot Coleman, J.M. Fortier, Darren Dougherty, Sally Fallon from Weston A. Price Foundation. So if you ever wondered, where are these people and who are these people, this is a good place to come and meet them.
Give us the dates again.
July 17 and 18 next year, 2020.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we keep people aware of that as we get closer to it, and got to talk to Melody about whether Reluctant Preppers and Finance and Liberty can take a road trip.
I think that sounds like a great idea. What better excuse?
Well, yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity for sure. We've been talking with Joel Salatin, co-founder of Polyface Farms in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Joel, as always, thanks for sharing your wit and wisdom with us and opening our eyes to some of the major trends that are affecting our access to high integrity and healthy food for our families, and reconnecting with authentic orthodoxy that gives us real freedom and quality time with our families and keeps generations healthy together. And thanks for joining us again here.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Reluctant Preppers, if you want to hear more bonus footage from other guests we've had on, come on over right now to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and access that bonus footage there. Take care.
It seems so hard to order. Who can I trust, and how do I even start?
Oh, you just go to sdbullion.com/rp, pick out whatever gold or silver you want, add it to your cart, you can check out, and it's on its way. And they're A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau.
Wow, it's that easy?
Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
After I order gold or silver, how can I trust I'm going to get it? And I don't want everybody to know that I'm ordering gold and silver.
Oh, it's okay. It's fully insured, it's trackable, and you have to sign for it, so nobody else is going to get it but you, and it comes discreetly packaged. If you order a small amount, like maybe gold, it'll probably come in a box that looks something like this. Okay. And if you order a large amount, maybe like silver, it'll come in a box that looks something like this.
Wow.
But it doesn't say gold or silver on there. It might say something industrial or something else like that, but nobody's going to know what you ordered.
Oh, that's great to know.
Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
If I own gold or silver, how will I ever be able to spend it?
Oh, sure. Well, consider good times or bad times. Like in good times, you can sell it back to the same place you bought it from. sdbullion.com/rp will buy it back at the best price guaranteed on the internet. You can take it to a local coin shop and get cash in your hand, completely anonymous. Some people you know may be willing to take gold or silver coins in exchange for goods or services. Now, in bad times, when things have really fallen apart, time after time in history, people have found that in hard times, gold and silver really does come through as something that people recognize as value even after everything else has failed. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
What if gold or silver drop in price after I order it?
Well, everything fluctuates with time, but nothing has held up longer and better than gold and silver throughout all the changes that have happened in history. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
good does gold do me anyway? I can't use it for anything.
Well, I think I found a form you might appreciate.
Wow. That's beautiful. Wow, I can wear that just about anywhere.
And you can take it with you through airport security and across borders. It's small and compact and lightweight, and you can even hand it down through generations. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/RP. Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions.